This podcast is a part of the Garnett Media Group podcast network. Garnett Media Group is the official partnership between student-run media outlets at the University of South Carolina. For more information on GMG podcasts or other student work, visit garnettmedia.org. Hi, my name is Dr. Jabari Evans, and welcome to Uncommon Knowledge, the podcast where we talk about all things spanning race and representation within mass media. This podcast is a partnership between the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of South Carolina and Garnett Media Group. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. So what's up, man? It's been a minute since we've chopped it up. I mean, I know we talked about your dissertation project when we first met, and then I saw you get through the process of the job market, and then we talked about you going down to Gainesville and taking the job at University of Florida. How have things gone since you've gotten down there, and where do you see yourself fitting into your department at your institution thus far?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, man, thanks for having me. I'm glad we got a chance to reconnect and, get
A lot
caught
better
up.
on the other
So,
side. The other side
yeah,
is a lot
yeah, it is, because I was going through it when you talked to me.
better.
That whole thing was like, woo, yeah. So, but we got through it. Just everything from the keeping the momentum going with the disc, doing the job market,
Mhm.
and because that took just, I mean, as you know, for me that took a month,
Yeah.
and I think that was just a unique. I kind of lucked out on that one because I
Mm.
know for other people it takes a lot longer than that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so, but that was still a month away. Like me, I didn't touch the disc at all,
Mm.
so so yeah, so it's like I had to pick back momentum up on that and then get things going. And yeah, we moved in July, like middle of July, and I literally defended virtually like 2 days after we moved.
Mm.
Everything was still in boxes, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
Just got the keys in the place.
Mhm.
And so, but that said, I was very proud to be able to defend my dissertation on my home turf, on my home
Right.
soil. So from Florida, which that was very meaningful, So yeah. But yeah, no, it's everything has been, just yeah, everything has been great. I mean, I like sincerely mean that. In terms of like, there's days I walk around, I'm just like, wow, is this really happening? Like, it's I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
not just visiting here. Like, no, this is
Mhm.
what I do. And I was telling some people too, like, I have these moments where I have to remind myself that like I'm done with the dissertation and
Right.
I'm not, because
Right.
I'll catch myself when I'm doing something I'm like enjoying, like exploring a new research path, or
Mhm.
sending emails, connecting to people, or like researching grants or looking at journal, and I'm like, what am I doing? I got to get back to. I feel like guilty, like I'm
Uh,
neglecting something, and it's like, no, dude, you're done with that. Like,
you can.
do what you're doing right now is your job. Like,
Yep.
do
And there's a lot of different ways to approach that. I think some
yeah.
people, I think there's probably like three lanes of how people approach it. Some people completely abandon the dissertation and they're just like, that's the thing that got me to this point, and it's not something I really want to revisit. Others, they take time away from it so that when they do revisit it, it's really fresh and they can
Mm-hmm.
put a much better spin on it and update
Yeah.
it and renovate it or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
and then there's other people who go right to it, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
just like, their mission is to turn that thing into something else, whether it's articles or a book or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm what, fourth year on the track, and I'm just now putting out the dissertation book. So it's like, take your time and put it away if you want to put it away or switch directions. Andre Brock, when I had him on, he was talking about how like he was just like, I didn't want to be a Katrina scholar, so I just left that alone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I moved in a
Mm-hmm.
different direction, and that's okay too. But yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that, like, saying you're doing well and like you're getting acclimated.
Yeah.
The thing that struck me about your work, and I remember talking to AJ Christian about your work is this idea of locality and like hyperlocal media and how like community media centers um, can be very powerful when they work in unison with community members, like when those who are actually doing journalistic work or creative work in some ways are actually in unison and take feedback from, those who are actual residents around them. How has your work in Atlanta and Philadelphia sort of shaped kind of the ways in which you think about what community media might mean?
Yeah. It's informed me in a way to like really pay attention to like motivations, right?
Mm,
So the intentions that people have, like what draws them to like be engaged in the first place. Because the one thing that is underscored in my dissertation is the volunteer aspect of it,
hmm hmm
and then also the fact that like doing production, especially if people are coming into a community media center and they are taking classes, they are committing themselves to help other people with their production project ideas, whether that be something that's audio based or video, or going, TV. It's a lot of work, you know, and the majority of those folks are doing that stuff all for like the love. It's all for the muscle, as like one of my collaborators, she mentioned, who one of the interviewees, Zarina Lomax, the Zarina Lomax show in Philly. She's like,
hmm
this is all from the muscle,
Yeah.
and so to me, it's like that's where there's profound meaning in that, of like, what's driving people to come in and to tell their stories and to coordinate, and then also to be like supporting other people who are trying to get their message out, and doing it in this is very like selfless, voluntary way, and they're all fulfilling something, that's in them, and so that's like a lot of what I'm like I explored in my research, and I think it's unique from, I mean, because you have those interactions where people gather and support each other and they communicate, on in the virtual, digital platforms. But it's something that's very unique about like the connectivity that happens in person, like so in the offline, but within the walls, the physical, like the brick and mortar of a place like Philly Camp,
Yeah.
and also what I've seen that tracked with like at People TV before I got to Philly Camp, and but those connections, which we could also like interpret as like social capital that get forged there, that ripples out, into the community. So, and so that's something that I think that's very so like, and I like the way that you put that. It's like when it's working in unison, when it's happening, I think that's when it becomes pronounced. That's when you can start to see it. Does it happen all the time? No. I've seen it when it's imploded. It didn't work at all, because we're humans, and so we always don't agree, we always don't vibe, sometimes we beef, but when it aligns
hmm
more than what I've seen in that is when it does align, like there's transformation that happens. There's the power for change that happens. There is, the building of community power, if you will, and so that to me, I'm constantly saying, let's, yes, these resources, a lot of time in many scenarios, they're very they're starved in terms of what they have to run on. They're running on their bare bones operations. To use a lot more, but they still, what the work that they put out is significant. What they foster is very has a profound impact on the people. Yeah.
Mm. As you're talking, I'm wondering, well, I'll save the second part of this question, but the first part of the question, I was wondering, like, this concept of citizen journalism that
Mm-hmm.
comes up a lot in research. I'm wondering, like, how has like social media, like, sort of shifted the ways in which like some of the things that maybe community centers do in building community can even cross certain boundaries through online spaces which have less, I guess barriers to entry. Have you seen like how social media might impact, or has it impacted some of the programs or some of the centers or some of the just the initiatives that you've been involved in?
Hmm. I mean, the one thing that social media has really helped centers get a sense of is actual audience engagement,
Right.
which has been that's been a big struggle, because of they're so small.
Hmm.
The ones that have channel, with the cable channels, and even on the radio side, like they don't get Nielsen ratings, so they don't
Right.
know. They're like, who's watching, who's listening, how long or where and all that, but now with majority of the centers across the country, like they are streaming like from their websites. They're also using the third party apps
Mm.
like Roku and YouTube. They can get data from the YouTube. They can get and of course they get data from their websites, so it's starting to get a sense of like what that reach is. um what is unclear, I've tried to ask, in my interviews of how producers are using those, how to engage in it. And most of it is like it's promotional, like, hey, my show's coming on, and hey, check me out. Sometimes you get people that do respond back to and say, but I still haven't, it hasn't, like, it's not like overwhelming in numbers. I
Mm.
think it's more so it's not it doesn't leave a mark, like, quantitatively, right? But if you look at, though, qualitatively, how people respond, it is significant. So, and so that's that, and that even gets back to this bigger, the question of like how I, just like in terms of like what community media means to me is like it's a qualitative endeavor.
Yeah.
People just have to fundamentally understand. And the problem, like methodologically over, and even through, but really methodologically, over the years, is that people have tried to like apply quantitative measures to it because of the technology, because of it's television or it's radio. And so it's like the way that we've always assessed value with this medium, with this technology, is through numbers, right? And it's like community media is the touch, right? It's the experience, it's the transformation. And
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't happen instantaneously. You can have many touches, but the actual ripple effects that is meaningful, like, can happen like next week or
Yeah.
within a couple months, or where someone's like, oh yeah, I saw that program where Zarina Lomax had a gun violence victim on, and then, like, 2 weeks later, they talking, something happens in their family, and they relate back to that program, and
Mm.
what that story that they heard actually helps get them through what just unfortunately had somebody, their cousin or whoever, got shot,
Wow.
or maybe somebody that they're related to
Mm.
got shot. And because they tuned into that program, they have a story or some frame of reference that they can use to console someone. So that's how the
Huh.
effects of community media plays
Yeah.
out, So,
Yeah.
but yeah, you have to interview, and you have to, to talk to people, and not all the time do people get that kind of feedback.
Mm.
But what I found too, I think that's interesting is, yeah, people want to have their program. I mean, I'm talking really specific to like the folks who, I've worked with at Philly Cam, and I interviewed. Um, they are, yes, they are making programming that, like, it's making a contribution to society, positive contribution. That's the core thing.
Hmm.
Um, and but not all the time do they know if it's actually, like, is it doing that.
Yeah.
But there's many instances where it's like that's not the driver for them.
Mm.
So, which again, it counters like how we think about the value and effectiveness of like mass communication of like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna make this product, and then so that somebody can, and we want to know if you like the advertisement, this content that I made is causing you to go buy this thing,
Mm.
right? And it's like, or to do this thing, you know. And so we want people to be moved, or we want there to be some forms of change or something positive that comes out in the community. But not all the time is that the leading. They're not preoccupied with that, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense. They're more so about, I'm just trying to get the story out, and it is something in me they're still exploring, and they're also learning at the same time. the mechanics of production, and and storytelling. And so it's they're not all the time thinking about like, what does my audience think about this? I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get this thing out there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought about that because I did some work with an organization in Chicago called Free Spirit Media, and it wasn't really for academic purposes. They were looking for graduate students to sort of like conduct research and and evaluate some of the things that they were doing. And one of the things that I remember about this particular program that they had that was located on the west side of Chicago, that was called The Real Shy. It was like almost like, I guess you could call it a magazine, but and ultimately became like this sort of social media content farm almost that
Mm,
they were doing with community members coming into the newsroom and pitching stories to the writers, beats
mm,
that typically wouldn't be covered by, say, the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Sun-Times or some of the local, network affiliates. But what started ended up happening is like when certain things that they did would have a ripple in any way on social media, a lot of the stories would get picked up by, CBS or NBC,
mm. Oh wow.
the ABC, and like, but a lot of times attribution wasn't given
Yep.
to, where they actually got the idea to do the story, or even where they would, follow behind what some of these youth journalists were doing and talking to certain people, and you would see their stories having, they'll piggyback. They'll go talk to the same sources and get different answers and not give credit or attribute
Wow.
to where they're getting stuff from. And I'm wondering if you've seen if you saw some of that in your own field work, but then B, like, is that just something that, you know, programs that are centered around Black and brown folks just have to endure? Is that something that, like, you know, is a running theme? Because I know I saw that in Chicago, but I'm wondering what you've seen kind of in your own work.
Yeah, yeah. That's very it's not surprising that
Mhm.
happens, that in general I've seen that with like community media, like if it gets picked up, that it's like it's not really referenced, or if somebody
Right.
interview like that. I do have a little bit, I'll admit, I mean, I do have a little bit of a beef with that,
Yeah.
because it's like I'll see, and again, Zarina just keeps coming to my mind because she's a very like clear example of a lot of a lot of points. But the Zarina, her program got picked up, but in terms of like, she got coverage from the local affiliates,
Mm.
from Fox, and
Right.
the thing one was like CBS, I think. And they talked about her event that she did. So she has a community um art exhibition, and it's portraits of gun violence victims, but it's also like it's paired with like dialogue,
Yeah.
about that storytelling.
Okay.
And so, and then in this whole process, which I've had a chance to, experience, and is this this collective healing that is going on,
Mhm.
But all of that, like, even, but stemmed back from her program that started at Philly Camp.
Excuse me.
But none of that connection isn't there, made by, like, when the coverage is kind of like, it's 30 seconds. Here's this thing, gun violence victims in North Philly, like, look at portraits, and they had these conversations that's meaningful, and that's it. More news at 11. So, and they'll talk to her. So it's like, that's how I've seen, just off the top of my head right now, like, coverage that's happened. I'm trying to think back on, there wasn't anything in my dissertation research that came up where like someone was, their stories may have been picked up on or piggybacked on, used in a way, um, without any kind of attribution. But I think it's, so there's like this also, this bigger problem of like that you even have that with journalists who are working in institutions. that, I mean, it's like, for just don't get down or don't like collaborate
Yeah.
with folks, people in the community, who are telling the stories or putting out information that like the communities actually want.
Yeah.
And so they letting them do that labor. And so it's like, but that it could be a value add. At least I see right now. It's like if there was productive collaboration, because I think that what like so the affiliates do, with the broadcasters, like their aims are different from what some of the community members are going. So
Sure.
they don't really have, it's not like direct competition. So it's like there could be a way to work there, but there's just been this separation. And there's kind of like this tradition of like just looking down on like this the hyper locals and the community, the citizen journalism, the citizen driven models, and practices. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, more recently, I've been thinking a lot about civic engagement. I mean, my book project is thinking about hip hop as a
Hmm.
form of civic engagement, or thinking about how the root or the heart of what hip hop was meant to do at its core in its earliest stages was to sort of rehabilitate and in some ways renovate uh urban areas that were, dilapidated, unheard, under resourced, forgotten about, however you want to slice it. Um, but in terms of like where we are now and just coming off the heels of this election, where a lot of stuff has been thrown around about misinformation and fake news and this and that, and from both sides to an extent, right? Is there um, a duty of community media in this time that has higher stakes than maybe in eras past?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I just got back from a documentary screening in Burlington, Vermont. We just screened. It's a first cut of story. It's called Burlington, This Is You,
Mm,
and it's the history of with Chittenden Community Television.
hmm
That's they operate the public access channel. Then they have like Town Meeting TV, which operates the government channel, and
mm,
it's 40 just turned 40 years old. And so there's like 30-minute cut that we screen, and I ask people to be thinking about like, yeah, this is a look back in time, but how does this inform like the contemporary contributions, and the relevance that can be made from an organization like this. And one
mm,
of the things that I like had underscored was this media education. So you talk about misinformation and disinformation, and just news literacy. I think that there's that really needs to be pushed forward, as well as like how do we like build trust back up, and I know that's a term that's become a bit buzzy right now, but still there's folks who just that don't trust, that are, and I think it's going to increase even more, like that'll be like news avoidance. They're not even just going to turn on or watch this stuff. I mean, I'm being honest, that I've gotten to the point just over the past couple of weeks where I'm just like, I don't even want to watch CNN. Like I can't take it. And so it's like how many other, and I push myself to watch it because I got to teach it. But
mm.
it's like can be critical of it. But how many other, there's so many other people that are feeling that way, and it is probably just going to go up, and perhaps, both sides. But how can we on this grassroots level, you know, start to educate people about, where their sources of information are coming from, and the possibility of how what does it mean to build to put out information that is actually that people can feel like they're like, okay, this is good. And I don't want to just say like it's not just about factual, because I think we get caught up on that too, about like, well, we just need to check the facts. But I think it's has to go beyond just being like checking facts. you know what can we do with this information, beyond just being entertained, or our anxieties being heightened, our fears being extended. So And I think it's a lot more manageable. It's overwhelming to think about how you can even. I mean, I just can't get my head. Like, how do you even like in this country right now? How do we even approach that like on that grand scale?
Mhm.
But if you break it down and do some coordinated efforts, that are focused more so on if you're looking at just in the region, like you got to be like counties and regions in your state. How can you start to then like make some traction there? And so, and I think that's where our community organizations come in. If you got a community media center, so but it doesn't even have to be with something that identifies as a media center, but it's an org or it's a collective of people that are devoted to like quality information storytelling and information sharing, so which can be, and I like, you said you were talking to AJ, AJ was reminding me about like we have to think expansive, like broad about
Mhm.
when we talk about news, like what that means, because we are different ways in different communities depending on like our cultures
Mhm.
of how that is created and how it's shared. So it just doesn't have to be in a CNN form. But I think on the ground in community spaces is where we can do a lot of that work, and we can push some things forward. And then there's also like issues what I'm reminded of coming back here, to my home state,
Mm.
that we can focus on that, like that in this, you know, public health, because I mean you got the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers, but when we look at like environmental preservation around here, that's something that people that kind of like that reaches a lot of people,
Mhm.
right? Because it has impact on the agricultural people, you know, it's got people, and then the wealthy people who trying to like keep their cute little beach situation going. You know what I mean? So everybody,
Yeah.
or people who got that, who are privileged and can go fishing, whatever, and they ball a boat, but it's like the environment down here, in sure thing, coastal South Carolina, like all it, like it's very,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's something. It's different from what when I was in Pennsylvania. Like fracking was the environmental issue, right? But
Yeah.
here it's like environmental. It covers so much, and it's more in of a concern at the, that's more immediate to people. So yeah, yeah. But I think we have to we look on those points to see if we can start to move the needle forward a little bit. Yeah.
What are some examples of some programs other than the ones maybe you have intimately studied that are like getting it right, in your opinion, in terms of this idea of community media and
Mm.
sort of like, I guess getting it right is reductive, but like if there are some organizations that are worth like our listeners actually reading into or following up upon as like models that are interesting that could be duplicated in other places.
Yeah, yeah. Ones that and this is like community media defined like broadly. I'm not just thinking of like community media centers like Philly Cam, but there are organizations top of mind that like Germantown Info Hub, which actually does collaborate with Philly Cam, and
Okay.
it's a part of Resolve, which is a collaborative news journalism organization in Philadelphia. So, and they actually share the same physical space as Philly Cam. But the Germantown Info Hub is something that I've been following for quite a while. I mean, since its inception, and that I recommend people to go check them out what they do. Because the emphasis is not so much on like traditional journalism and like news making, but it's more distribution about information, that the community says that it wants, and so it's aggregating that and making sure that it gets out. And they use multiple platforms, they use there's multiple approaches. Like they have like actual like in-person community gatherings, events. They're using the local radio station. So they were on Germantown Radio, which was a community radio station. They got a short program that's on Philly Cam. They're also putting out a digital newsletter. So that and using multiple platforms, and it's a very small organization. 1-2 people that are really really driving it. But they getting a lot of good work done. Black by God in West Virginia is another, organization that I recommend people check out. That is, they produce it. It looks like a magazine. Has a magazine feel, but again, it's storytelling of that comes from the African American communities in Appalachia, right? And stories about faith, stories about like hope, stories about and then their struggles, the triumphs. Um, and then in the realm of the actual like community media centers, of course, like I have to shout out Philly Cam, for people to check that out, phillycam.org. There's just a wide range of programs, that really represent, everything from, you know, local, like hyper local information, like Black Talk Radio, to cooking, health and wellness is big, you know. And another big one that I would say, and I would shout out, so I said Zarina Lomax, the Zarina Lomax show, but also Shamika Sawyer, who does the Five Shorts Project. And I say those two because they connect to one thing that is that community members are really using like all of their resources to address is gun violence. Like that's very pronounced in Philadelphia. And so there are multiple programs on Philly Cam, that are volunteer driven, that take different approaches to raising awareness, telling stories about the victims, and just raising awareness about it, and just helping people actually too, like just survive their trauma, you know. And so when I see, so that's the thing too, that when I got engaged in the work and was moved by it, and so it's to support people that are doing that, like that we are actually trying to make a contribution to the civic health, make a contribution to the lives of the people in our communities, So yeah, those are, there's St. Paul Neighborhood Network, in the Twin Cities. Speak MPLS is another organization that has, it's built on a legacy that is 40 years old, in that of operating public access channel, but it has rebooted itself, and it has a vibrant, youth program, and they're engaging young people, that are in the Twin Cities area into like documentary filmmaking, and so that's another thing too. Is like we gotta take that into consideration, where it's like they're engaging in storytelling. They're not sitting at the news desk, like in the traditional way, but they're approaching storytelling, and they're doing some form of like, yeah, this information sharing and news production, but through like just as documentaries, and another thing, then I bring up SPNN, I bring up Speak MPLS, is because they really have a strong engagement from the Somali community. So you have a lot of immigrant communities that are in Twin Cities areas, and
Yeah,
they've just
I
done an
did know
exceptional job. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of where folks can come in, they can produce programming that's in their native tongue.
that.
And so that's one thing too. A lot of, I think, and speaking of like community radio, community television, it parallels, it connects with like the ethnic press in that way,
Mhm.
where it's like it's you can be in your native tongue, and that means a lot for immigrants who are coming over, and it's just like, okay, they want to see, they want to hear some of their folks, they may not be able to get out all the time, but they've got, or they could tune it in on the radio as they ride around, and they can watch it, at home. So, or streaming, So, but they're getting the perspective of people who are in this country and not from, they have their connections back to the home country, but then it's like, well, what are the people here experiencing,
Yeah,
that perspective, which
yeah.
is unique, and how are they surviving this whole like Americanization process, that acculturation, yeah.
I mean, what it means to be American,
Yeah.
to be shifting by the day, or
Totally.
even by the second. Um, I know I've done a lot of work with organizations whose lifeblood is attached to grants, or lifeblood is attached to, you know, bootstrapping themselves, or having advocates within local government even to do the work that they do. In this period of time where there's like a level of uncertainty, and I know like not-for-profits are volatile in and of themselves, but like, is there some sort of worry amongst those who are doing community media about funding sources and the ability to sort of carry on, like in a way that's even more exponential than maybe in prior years, even the last, I guess, Trump presidency? Because there seems to be a lot of talk about dialing back on supporting certain types of initiatives, especially those that are like, or have been championed as being exemplary of like inclusiveness, equity, DEI, quote unquote, right? Are you hearing rumblings of that amongst like partners, research partners that you've worked with? Is there like a fear um, that sort of matches some of the people who I'm around? Because that seems like there's a general fear of what's next for some folks.
Mhm. I mean, what I've sensed so far is the fear of is being proactive and just and really kind of gathering up the what we have right now to support the people who we have a sense that are going to be attacked even more. Like the people have already just, as we've seen, unfortunately, just throughout this election, how people have been attacked. Beyond the two candidates beefing with themselves, like community wide,
Yeah.
Haitians getting attacked. Like, I mean, everybody getting attacked, right?
Yeah.
Trans people getting attacked, right? So, and so, yeah, so that's I have heard of, a friend of mine who is here in Alachua County in Gainesville. She works for Immigrant Services, organization, and they just building up resources and stockpiling for they so when it starts to really fall out, like they, at least they're prepared, and there I've heard some conversations too from like the funders are starting to be like, wow, they can like be able to like direct things to help people just get ready, for what's next to come. The one thing I am curious though about that I haven't heard so far, and it could be just because of my position here um is about public broadcasting,
Mm.
and because as we know, like NEA, that line item has always been, it was threatened it's been threatened during many administrations. Let's just say it's been it's threatened, legislatively, but then like it was also from the executive, when Trump was in office, there was some threats to, the National Endowment for the Arts, also public broadcasting. So CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So that's I'm very like concerned about that, you know,
Mm.
because it just seems like, anything that is like somewhat public benefiting, public ser right, and no, it's no matter who you are, like white, black, Puerto Rican, it's it's public serving. That's the thing. That is like that's what's at stake.
Mm.
You know, all any of that stuff can get cut. And especially if it's no, I will say, if it's something that is read superficially as progressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's and you have a lot of, I said I'm concerned about that because like the institution that I'm at, like we operate a public broadcasting channel. We have
Mm.
NPR and we have PBS. You know, Georgia Public Television has a very robust, it's had that for a long time, and they also have the public radio, WAVE, and and so then you have a lot of people that are rely on that information, and so what if that stuff really gets slashed, and what do we do? And I'm just very, very, you know, very, very, very tired and cautious of the, being dependent on the philanthropy from the private sector, you know. And so and yeah, it that has done, it's not all, I'm not speaking like in this very, very broad way, like, oh, well, it's just been all bad forever. But we, as we've kind of seen with the ownership of, with the private, with Jeff Bezos coming in, with the paper, I mean, we're seeing these, and where there's been interference in the editorial, like that's concern when you get into that relationship with the private sector, that type of philanthropy, quote unquote philanthropy, then you get yeah. So
Yeah.
that's very concerning, and we've got to have. I'm not. I'm not sure what's the best way forward, but it's like, you know, um, we don't need to go down the road where yeah, everything is just gobbled up by, like, it's just all, privately owned and commercial, you know, quote unquote public or good for you information. So because I'm fearing that's what comes next, where it's like, just like how a lot of social media apps were sold in the very beginning. This is good for democratic communication. You can express yourself, get your original ideas out there, connect with
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
build up your social network. And it's like, oh wow, this is so it on its face it has like, oh, this is very like pro social, this socially positive thing, but it's like they
It's
getting clicks, they getting ads, they selling you. So
it's definitely couched in something else. I'm wondering, and this,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, I have two questions. One is like a softball, and one is like a little bit of a curveball. Um, I'll go with the curve first. Like, how are students in your classes? I'm assuming you're teaching. If you're not, excuse me. But
Got
I'm
one class.
okay.
Yeah.
So, how are students in your classes sort of responding like knee jerk right after this election? Like, what? And we're both in schools of journalism communication. Um, I mean, directly, this is impacting many of them, the field that they're trying to go into. In some cases, the things that they're having to actually actively write about or report about or, pursue in terms of storylines. What are some of the things that you're hearing in the class that you're teaching currently from students, if they're saying anything at all?
Yeah. I they you know the I actually I had to teach that Wednesday.
Mm.
My class is Monday and Wednesday, and that, man, I want to tell you, that was tough. That was tough. Like I was really like, man, really thinking about, should I call it off today,
Right, 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 right,
and
right.
it was
Yeah.
hard for me to get out the house. You know what I mean? So, and but I was like, no, this is what we do. This is why we here. I gotta show up.
Mm.
I gotta show up for the students, and I gotta be there for them, and or be there for whoever needs me, and but I gotta say, we gotta talk.
Hmm.
And so it's, I think the one thing, the mood wasn't, they were pretty like just as is. I remember, and I was kind of like, "Are y'all like, how are y'all?" They were just kind of like they. It's just kind of like, "We're here. Let's keep going. It is what it is."
Yeah.
I think some had like, they were like, had like compartmentalized. And they just kind of like the ones who were
Mhm.
disturbed. But yeah, it's the one thing I do remember, is before the actual election. I think this was maybe the week before, or it was two. And I went into class, and this was after Trump had, made the statement about the press is the enemy of the state. And I was like, whoa, hold up, hold up. We got out of all the other stuff that dude has done, has got going on. I was like, you got someone that's running for the president I was like, this of the United States, that is calling the press the enemy of the state.
Yeah.
That's a problem. And then so I had to go to my students. I pointed out, I pointed. I just it wasn't just that one thing, but I pulled. There was just quotes, right, that had
Uh-huh.
just had come out, and I was like, let's just go through these critically,
Yeah.
and and then also there were some terms. I was like, you're hearing a lot of, because we talk a lot about rhetoric. I was like, there's a
Yeah.
lot of rhetoric that's coming out, and so what do these terms mean? You hear xenophobia, you hear genocide, you hear, what is this? So um but the one thing that I made sure I did was I pulled out the First Amendment
Mm.
verbatim and put it on a slide
Mm.
without saying what it was. Announced it. I just put it up, and I was like, "What is this?" And they were like, "Oh, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution." Like nobody was like, "That's the First Amendment." No one said of the United. Like nobody came out like, and I'm like, "Y'all are journalism
Mm.
students.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm.
the First Amendment." And I was like, and then over here, we have somebody that's saying like this is protected, but then you have someone over here that is the leader of the country, the soon to be leader of this country, that is calling what you're going into the enemy, calling you the enemy of the state, you know? And so it's having those conversations to make them think critically about like, just like this is a concern, here. And it's not just so much about like partisan concern. It's some of this language that's being, it's the rhetoric that's being weaponized. And so, and I think in that way, I was able to, it wasn't about like, oh, this is someone saying, trash about Black people or, about Haitians eating, dogs and cats or whatever. It's like, that's in there too, but let's take that aside. And it's like, okay, for you all who identify as this, y'all are a problem too, you know? And so, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, we've had very, some productive conversations in the class, which I appreciate. And there wasn't any like, major disputes or anything, like major disagreements, where I had to mediate everything. So um yeah, I told them that it's very important just for them to be, just learn how to be critical, of what's being, sold to them and what's being put out there, you know.
That's real.
And then how to just develop that muscle so that then they can make their, informed, decisions and not just buy everything at face value. So yeah,
Mm.
I think, they get it to, but yeah, overall, I've been just very, very pleased with them. They've been very receptive, and you know how you can tell like when students are with you,
Yeah.
not all of them are with. Now, there's a few that
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I'll no, I can't. I don't know what to tell you. Like I can't. you where you at, and it's week 12, and you're still not with me. So um, but for the most part, like they're like right there, with me. They're processing. They're thinking about the things. So yeah, you know.
That's always a good thing. I mean, I think that because I know here there's probably a similar tenor. I know sometimes, it because I teach things that are sometimes explicitly about race or Black culture, so on and so forth. Sometimes there's like an assumption, I think my classes, I did the numbers, are like about 40% Black typically,
Mm, mm,
not all of, I'm teaching one-on-one this semester, so it's not that way, but typically like when I'm teaching, say, you know, um, race, class, gender in the media, if I'm teaching hip hop media in society, if I'm teaching, media, race, and sport, anything that's kind of centered in on race, it's a certain type of crowd. Even the non-Black students are generally coming in with a certain type of understanding or want for exploration about
right.
those issues. And so, some of them are the most vocal. Actually, I think my Black students are typically like not wanting to have to educate others about how they feel or articulate it. It's just kind of like, I'm here so I won't get fined, and I need to just get to where I need to go. And like, I'm not going to upset the apple cart. I might pull you aside if something is just overly, insensitive that I've heard from somebody that's not Black. But like, for the
Yeah.
most part, they're just like, yeah, we're used to sort of seeing,
Hmm.
maybe this is a regional thing too, used to getting the short end of the stick, and so it's like, all right, we're gonna push through this like we pushed through the last one, and it's just like, but there's definitely some different implications on this one,
Yeah.
and so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, particularly in our departments where I think like we're sort of the arbiters of the the information that gets sent to the masses, and we're thinking about how folks are practitioners crafting those stories, and a lot of the folks in our classrooms are going to be in newsrooms and in these organizations that influence the media we consume over the next 4 years. A lot of them will be, and so
Yeah.
it's interesting to have that conversation. The last thing I was going to ask you is something I've been asking kind of everybody I've talked to, and this is something I think I'm just going to continue doing with guests for the duration of however long I continue this podcast. And that's just like what in this time media wise is bringing you joy. And that could be a TV show, it could be an actual influencer, it could be a song, it could be an artist, it could be a meme, it could be a podcast, it could be so many different things. I've gotten a lot of different answers, a video game. But in terms of this landscape of media
Mm.
and communication, what's something that right now in this moment, not necessarily right now, but in this moment, like week, month, is bringing you joy as you move through your day?
Oh, you know, I think the movement, the migration
Mhm.
of Black academics, and other folks to over to like Blue Sky, like
Mm.
that is, and no disrespect to our brother Andre Brock, but
Mhm.
it's seeing who's all about the Twitterverse, but
Right, right, right.
um yeah, but it's like seeing that folks had already moved. I was on Black Sky, actually I got on like a year ago, but
Mm.
it wasn't really. And I think there was like a Black academic. Yeah, there was like a Black academic hashtag or something. Like there was Black Sky. That's what it was.
Mm.
But like there was some journalists that were cross posting that I followed on like Twitter and I also followed on, but it wasn't the memes weren't there. And I think that's where, because that's the second thing that just gives me life is when something absurd happens and seeing the Black response from it,
Yeah,
on on
yeah.
Twitter, or and see it on, and then but it's finally, it's like, oh, there it is on Black Sky. So, yeah, it's yeah, and I think it's the folks just being kind of like, hey man, like the Drewski meme, like, hey man, no,
Yeah.
someone will post the article like, oh, they're tearing this up and they're gonna slash that, and it's like, hey,
That's dope. That's
that's
dope.
what y'all voted for, so
Yeah,
now
yeah,
y'all can
it
say,
is. It certainly is. It's like,
yeah, hey, okay. And someone says like, I'm gonna be doing a whole lot I told you so over the next 2 years or so,
oh man,
yeah.
that's dope.
But yeah. So, but yeah, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate the conversation.
For
Yeah.
sure, man. I appreciate you, man. This is another episode of Uncommon Knowledge. Um, I appreciate you, and we'll get on to the next episode. Until then, peace.
All righty. Take care.
All right, man. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, leave a rating or review. And to catch the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at KnowledgeSense82 and on Twitter at KnowledgeSense82. Now that's different than how you normally would spell it. That's NALEDGE, since 82, as in 1982. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Peace.